want to welcome everyone to tonight's lecture. This is being recorded, live stream. And for those who don't know me, I'm Evan Douglas, the Dean of the School of Architecture at Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute. I want to preface by saying that the lecture is sponsored by Architecture Plus, very generous of them to support the School of Architecture. In fact, they provide funds for an annual lecture. They're a terrific firm in downtown Troy that has national reach, and they also are really good friends of the School of Architecture here. It's a great pleasure and honor to introduce this evening's speaker, Gonzalo Diez+Ponce, the co-founder and principal of the widely acclaimed firm Diez+Muller, based in Quito, Ecuador. Established in 2004, Diez+Muller have produced over the last 2 decades an extraordinary portfolio of exquisite residential, institutional, and commercial buildings that have received international acclaim, inspired by the splendor of the Ecuadorian landscapes, an inspired legacy of indigenous building types, a deep appreciation for the cultural inheritance of materials and craftsmanship that continues to resonate as an essential means of communication in places where the tradition of building remains so strong, and architecture as a universal language. Diez+Muller serve as important ambassadors for the next generation of contemporary architects in their homeland of Ecuador, calling attention to the core principles that underlies their unique work. Ted Brown, the architectural critic, offers an insightful reading of the disciplinary themes that emerge from one project to the next. And I quote, "Their architecture proposes a reoccurring set of questions and operations that don't enclose a set of beliefs or replay a generic solution. Working at different scales, they ask disciplinary questions that are universal, but answer them in a very specific material and local manner. The abstract language consists of line, plane, volume, precise punctures in a surface, or a surface produced through repetition of the parts. The material language in each project makes different claims about what constitutes the ground, about what is the spatial extension of interior to exterior, and how to address enclosure, how to articulate in spatial volumes the social program. It's an impressive practice that continues to evolve in terms of the increased complexity of the building programs and sites, the changing scales of the projects, and most importantly, the larger impact their buildings have had on the surrounding communities. It's certainly an exciting firm to watch in the coming years ahead. Please welcome Gonzalo Diez+Ponce to RPI.
Thank you very much, Doug. Thank you, Robert, for the invitation. We are very, very excited to be talking and showing some of the work we've been doing. Two decades sounds like I'm a little older than. It's almost 2 decades. My partner Felipe couldn't make it today, but well, I'm going to show some of the work that we're doing in our office. We've had our office for 17 years already. As you said, Doug, we work in Quito, Ecuador, and we do various types of projects and typologies, and nothing. Hopefully, you'll enjoy and see some work that is maybe different from what has been done in the States in terms of location, which I think makes a big difference. Let me share.
Looking forward.
Let me know if you can see.
Yes.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, I'm going to start. Our today's talk is called Architecture as a Coherent Act. We, as I said, we're a design office in Quito, Ecuador. We do all kinds of projects and all kinds of scales and typologies. From small residential private houses to large-scale buildings and residential work. For example, here we've done work like a little chapel here for a two-person house to a large-scale project, which was a competition for a governmental building in Quito. We do a lot of competitions, and we try to be engaged also in the academic work. But as I was telling Doug, our office has been very busy the last years, and we've only been able to do some part-time work with schools, but there's something that we really, really enjoy, and hopefully we'll be able to go back soon. Something important is maybe to start to talk about where our field of work is. Quito is in Ecuador, as we know. Ecuador is in latitude 0, right on the equator. That's what's called Ecuador. And Ecuador has mountains, has the Andes, has the coast, and has the jungle. We live in the highlands, in the mountains in Quito. This is a painting which we really like to show whenever we're talking to people who are not from here. This is a painting by Guayasamín, which is one of probably the most important painter from the last century here in Ecuador. And this pretty much resumes what Quito is. It's a city in the mountains. Mount Pichincha, which is that big mountain on the background. And Quito is a big strip. This painting was done 60 years ago. So the city is a little more complex and more elongated, but it's pretty much a long strip and a valley that lies between the mountains. What's marked in red is pretty much the extension of the city. We have a very important colonial center from the Spanish colonial era in 1600s, and it's one of the most well preserved in Latin America. And the bottom picture, you can see this strip and this extension that runs all across this valley that goes north-south. And then you have these mountains, the Pichincha on the background, and this other little hill where on their foreground, it takes you to the valleys, which is sort of these new suburbs where people are moving to live. The city has grown a lot, and it's gotten very dense. So now a lot of people move into these valleys where the weather is a little lower. Quito is 2,800 meters high, so it's pretty high, and the valleys have about 300 meters lower and a better weather and temperature, etc. This is Quito. This is an aerial view of Quito. Pichincha on the right. So you can see it's a very dense city. It's a city that used to be low scale. Now it's gotten a lot of building, and a lot of high rises have been built. In the center, it's Carolina Park. It's our central park. It's not as big or as nice as the one in New York, but it gives a very good idea of how the city lies in this long valley that goes north-south. And the lecture I wanna speak about, I'm gonna be showing you sort of the lecture in two parts. The first part I'm gonna go a little faster, a little briefer, and the second part I'm gonna show you. I'm gonna focus on two projects that we finished not too long ago, and sort of compile these few ideas or reflections, as it's stated here, that talk about this coherency of working as architects here in Ecuador, especially in Ecuador in the highlands. We have done some work outside the city, even some work outside the country, but most of our work is focused on the highlands, on this mountain region, which is very typical of in terms of, and very characteristic and specific in terms of culture, tradition, urbanity, architecture, etc. So this excites us a lot and has a lot to do with how we work. First of all, I'm gonna go as I said, pretty quick, but the first idea is place in context. The second one is matter and tectonics, or materials and tectonics, permeability in the city, and finally sustainability, which is something that we as architects are every time more and more interested and responsible for. Okay, so first of all, I'm going to talk about where we work. Place in context, the mountains here are one of the most important things to work with here is geography. Geography, topography plays a very big part in the way we work, whether it is in a more urban context. The city lies within the mountain, so even the city has these big topographic changes that make working here very interesting and very challenging, all the way to the valleys where we do more residential work for private clients, etc. I'm going to go and explain a few projects fairly quickly that go within these themes. These 4 themes that I talked about, I'm going to be speaking about, sort of correlate and pretty much go hand in hand in every project we do, almost every project we do. So whether it is a more rural project or a more urban project, whether it's a large scale or a small scale, we're always thinking and reinforcing these ideas in terms of how we want to think about architecture. This first project I'm going to show I want to show you, it's a big canyon with a river, and we had a site for a client, which is a contractor that we've worked with in many projects, and he has built a lot of the houses we've done. And here you can really see what I'm talking about. This sort of big canyon where the mountains and the scenery is such a big part of what the experience has to be. The views, the way how you treat the topography, how you work and situate the buildings in terms of these mountains is something very important. This house is one that we're going to be starting construction fairly soon, and it talks about the relationship of this element that sort of receives you in a very discreet and almost invisible manner from the top of the hill, and then opens up towards the canyon and the views. And then those interior spaces sort of give you a glimpse of what the views and the spaces and the relationship to the landscape is going to be. This is another house we finished a couple years ago. Again, it's a very different site, but it's also, you can see again the topography and the relationship to the landscape. This is more of a wooden area, and again, working in these steep sites and these hills makes the views such a big part of what the clients look for and what we have to resolve in terms of the projects. Our process is I think the most important part of how we work, or what we produce. We're as much or even more excited about how we go through these projects and develop these projects as the final product. A lot of model making, a lot of drawing, even freehand drawing. You can see some of the utilities here, some of the stuff I used to own when I was in school, and I still own them. But it's an office that works a lot with this traditional way of making architecture. It doesn't mean that we don't use computers. It doesn't mean we don't do renderings. But it's a very, very hands-on process in terms of how we study the projects, as in this case, where we're going to situate the house in terms of the topography, orientation, views, etc. And this is the result of that first house, that second house I'm showing you. Those initial drawings are studies in the relationship of the house to the place, how this works. This sort of star-shaped house is designed and built within the trees, around the trees, and how part of the house sort of submerges on the right towards the topography, and then sort of sits on the other side of the terrain toward and opens up towards the view. And this, you can see very clear, this sort of this relationship of this ground plane versus the roof plane towards the landscape and the views. This is another house which we finished not so long ago. This is about an hour and a half away from Quito, from the city. It's on the countryside more. This is on the real mountain. And the views here are pretty much unique because you have all these different volcanoes and snow-capped mountains that, as the house started developing, we started with this very traditional colonial type of arrangement, which is this sort of this U shape with the patio and the courtyard in the middle. And then how this house sort of started fragmenting itself and orienting its views, these bars that have these views oriented to all these different specific mountains. Look, you can see here, this is sort of what we have to work with here, which is not so bad, and which makes our work really interesting in terms of it's so varied and different every time we approach a new project. And then again, how the house sits in the landscape and its relationship to the surrounding. Within the same theme of place, this is a project which it was a competition, we didn't win, but this is a project which situates next on a hill, on a mountain next to the colonial. This is already in the city, but it sits on a hill that overlooks the old colonial city. And you can see here, the project is the one on the middle, but either on the section and on the diagram, you really start to see the complexity of the projects when you start working in this really steep topography, and in terms of how you circulate around them, how you work your relationship to the next door buildings, to the buildings below you, to the views, and it makes you sort of how would I say, gives you an expertise in terms of working with topography. Sometimes they come out really fast, they're easy to work at, but depends on the complexity of the project. Some of these projects could be very challenging, but also very interesting. That is pretty much what the region gives you, no? This is another building we did, which sits on a really high part of the city. You can see the more urban context in here, and that's what I was speaking to you about before, which is how we sort of are lucky to work in these different locations and zones within the city. This is a building that sits on an existing stone podium that used to be an old house, which is sort of this white, pristine project, looks over the views, but sits in this existing retaining stone wall that used to be part of the collective memory of all these old neighborhoods that used to contain these elevated gardens and platforms for all the houses that used to exist here a long time ago. The second idea, although you're gonna be mixing all these together and seeing how all these projects mix all these themes together, is the idea of the matter and the tectonics. It is very important to say that here in Ecuador, craftsmanship, hand labor, everything still very cheap and very qualified. I think compared to most of the construction in the US, which is more standardized and more, I wouldn't say catalog-like, but most of the materials, you can just get them and specify them and get them together. a lot of the projects that I'm going to show you here are mostly done by people who are, as I said, very qualified and traditionally qualified in terms of craftsmanship and putting things together more manually. And that's something that really excites us in terms of every time how we approach a project, because now we're not only thinking about space and light and the materials themselves, which is obviously what's most important in architecture, but how we're going to assemble these things and how we're going to put these things together. This first project is it's in another canyon. As you can see, we work with in a lot of canyons and creeks and rivers here, but it's all part of the geography. That's what we have all around us. And it was a project that was a house with a simple program for a family of 2 and kids that sat on this canyon, and with a very, very particular materiality in this canyon of this sort of brownish, yellowish rock and dirt, which when we started thinking about the project, the materiality was something that we really want to potentialize and sort of mimic what we had in this context, and sort of, even though the house is very present in the landscape, we wanted to really be part of the material of the surrounding landscape. We did a lot of tests in terms of materiality, and we ended up working with cast in place concrete, a very rough cast in place. That's the picture on the right is it's a detail of the final product, and it's this idea that has a relationship to the walls and the materials of the surrounding context. This is the house. That's how it sits on the landscape. That's the big canyon towards the river. And I think it's important to say that even though we work with this more traditional way of building and construction, some of it is very, very contemporary in terms of, we also work with steel, with wood, with higher technologies that whether they contrast or complement the other ways of working, they're definitely contemporary ways of designing and building, as you're going to be seeing in most of the projects here. I hope that my English is okay. I was afraid it was a little rusty. We don't speak much English, especially not giving lectures in English every day. So hopefully everything, if you have any questions or want to say something, please go ahead.
Hey, Gonzalo, it sounds perfect. Your English
great,
is perfect.
Great.
Thank you.
Thank you. So this house is very much about materiality. The sun here in Quito, that's something that's very important to say in terms of how we take advantage of materials also. It's the most direct sun you can get in the world because it's almost perpendicular, being on the equator. So the materiality sort of comes to life, I would say, because of this really, really strong sun. We have some really, really strong cancer issues also, but I think if you take care of yourself, the benefits are more important than the other. So again, here in terms of how you shade, how you control the light, not only with the concrete and the detailing of that resemblance of the context, but also those steel frames that sort of start to contrast with the more traditional construction. Stone is a very, very important material here, which is very cheap still to work with, and it's real stone. This is a house we did a while back. This is one of the earliest houses we did, and it's about this house that sits on this very heavy retaining wall, this stone retaining wall, and has this lighter structure and roof on top of it. But I don't want to show you all these projects in detail. I just want to sort of start to show you the importance of the materiality and the easiness of working not the easiness of the technique or the design, because that's never easy, and you have to really think about what you're doing and how you're putting things together. But in terms of the availability of the material and the craftsmanship to do all these things. For example, here we're working with concrete. We have this steel bridge that takes you from the top level of the site towards the house over this courtyard. But you can see the stone we use on the walls is a different type of stone that we use, these pavement stone, or those little details on the floor that sort of direct certain axes and stuff like that, which are smaller river stones. So there's a lot to take advantage of here, and that's where we're interested in most of our architecture. How we use these resources in terms of craftsmanship, of materials, of the people who work these, which are not common in other parts of the world, and that's what we should be taking advantage towards our design. The materiality here is very different. This is a very large scale for Quito, for Ecuador, maybe not for the States. But it's a large scale office building that we finished 2.5 years ago. No, almost 3 years ago. I think the pandemic, I sort of lost a year there, but it's I think 3 years ago. And it's a very urban project. Sits right on the beginning, right on the flat part of the city, but it's on the back side, starts towards the big hill in the back. It's a very big mass of a building. It's a big footprint, and we wanted to sort of dilute that, making a more abstract and more plastic sort of image towards the building. So it's pretty much a glass building, which is contrast with this other envelope, which is an all concrete material, which is what surrounds the whole building. But you're going to see the material here is a more refined, more engineered type of construction. Here we work with a very, very big construction company, which is the ones who promoted the building, and this is where they're having their new offices now. And we work with these precast concrete panels for the envelope. And there's just a couple of big walls that sort of intersect the building that are built in place, cast in place. But most of it is just these prefab panels that make this sort of tapestry type of finish when you look up close. But when you look from the far away, as you can see here in the image, it's just this plastic envelope that plastic, I mean, in terms of plasticity, that surrounds and give this very abstract sculptural quality to the building. But as you can see, it's a very different type of construction. It's with really good formwork, good quality vibration, good quality pouring, as opposed to that other more traditional and more, I would say, less formal type of construction that we saw in the other houses, especially in the house that we saw before. So they're very different contrasts in terms of materiality, but they both talk about an idea about what you want to achieve in these projects, and the finishes in terms of what you want to do. You can see the light that I was telling you about in Quito, which is a very strong direct light, which brings this incredible three-dimensionality, this shadow play to all the projects, which is very, very interesting. This is I'm not going to show you the whole project, but this is the main entrance. There's a big lobby. There's some artwork that was commissioned both on the inside and the outside of the project. There's a big public square on the outside, and you can see those big walls that are cast in place. But then the envelope, what's on top of the glass of the lobby, it's all prefab panels that were brought and put in place on the building, on the side of the building. As I said, we work with all kinds of projects, and we've had the luck of working a lot in the city and doing some very urban projects in very urban conditions. And other than giving this new face to the city with these taller buildings that we've been able to work with, most of our interest in terms of how we work with the city is in terms of how the building, first of all, responds to that context in terms of its vocabulary. We usually try to work with these more silent and simple buildings, which power derives from different things, more than actually working with strange or eccentric forms. We try to do this more clean, silent buildings but talk a lot about the relationship to the context, the materiality, and that's sort of the things that stand out. But most of all, it's how the buildings, these tall buildings, sit on the ground and the relationship on the street level. That's what really interests us and makes a difference between having this just tall building that you can look from afar, or having these buildings that contribute somehow to the public realm and the city. You have to understand that most of these buildings, as I was telling Doug before, we haven't done many public buildings. We're working on doing some of that stuff. A lot of these buildings are private buildings, so these are buildings that are not really open to the public. They're they have their own security and they're more private conditions, but it's how you deal with what's going on the bottom of the base of these buildings, and how you relate to the public and private realms, what makes these projects successful, I think. This first project is it's a really it's a 14-story tower, it's not very big. Its footprint is kind of small, and we only had I think 45 feet in width for the whole building. So it was a very challenging thing in terms of the structure and how we resolve this technically. But the first idea, as you can see in these drawings, is about how you sort of create this carpet that brings the city into the building, or vice versa, right? This is the building. As I said, it's a simple tower, which talks very clearly about the relationship to the next door buildings in a more enclosed facade that faces the east and west sun in Quito, which is the most powerful, where you have to be careful with. And the north-south facades, which are less problematically in terms of luminosity and sun, etc., are these more permeable glass faces that relate to the buildings next door. As you can see in the drawings, these floor plans, it's a very simple, very skinny building. But on the one on the left, you can see this sort of open plaza or square that somehow relates to the city. And even though the site is not very big and the plaza isn't that big, it actually looks a little bigger than it is in this picture. But it's how you start to open this place up. I don't know if you can see on these pictures are not very good, but the brick building on the right is at that different level from the street, or they have these closings for security. And our idea is to sort of open these buildings up to the city, as I showed you in that other big building, through that open plaza, how you use the landscaping, and how these open spaces start to integrate into the interior of the building. It's a double height lobby space, which continues the paving and sort of makes you feel, even though you're not part of the building, or you're just somebody using the square, or there are a couple of benches, you can go eat there, even if you're not going into the building. That transparency and openness to the lobby sort of makes you feel you're part of it, and sort of this dual idea of that one relates and comes out of the other. So that's those little, the idea is that those little moves or intentions make big differences in the city, especially in this city, which is it's starting to become a very dense city, and what happens in the street side becomes very, very important. This is another building we finished a few years ago, a couple of years ago, which again, you see in that diagram on the top, the first drawing is what you could actually build on the site. It's a 6-story building. It's all apartment buildings. There are 53 units, I think. But it sits on a cul-de-sac on a street that closes, and it's very narrow and very closed up. All the buildings on the surrounding it all have walls. That's a very big thing here. Security. Most people think that by building these big walls and enclosing building, that gives them more security. Is not really the fact, but we sort of approach it the other way around. We sort of open these plazas to the city. This has sort of like an L configuration, an L-shaped building that opens up and gives this narrow street a big opening, where, as I said, it's sort of a private, semi-private, semi-public square, but all the people around it use it. The kids in the building go out and use the plaza. They wait for the school bus there. So it's how, independent of the architecture itself, how you permeate these buildings towards the city, and the difference you can make by opening these spaces up instead of sort of enclosing them towards the street. And then you get all these more interesting spaces where a lot of activities happen. Landscaping, benches at night, it becomes sort of a lively place that relates to the circulation or the apartments on top, and it becomes a very lively place. And the last idea, before I go into these two specific projects, which are going to be containing most of these ideas, that's why I chose those projects that I want to go into a little more deeper, is the idea of sustainability. That's something that we're working on every day a little more. That's becoming a big part of what we do as architects. I think maybe a little slower or behind what's happening maybe in more developed countries like the US or Europe, but it's catching up fairly quickly, and it's something that we're very interested in and hopefully taking in consideration for most of our projects in the future. This is that big concrete office building that I showed you. It conceptually is the idea of, it sits right in front of a big park that you can see on the image on the top, and it's the idea of bringing this greenery and landscape into the building, whether it's in these elevated gardens every 2 levels. On this back, this is where I told you that the flatness of the site starts picking up towards the hill on the top, so it has a relationship to the mountain, to the greenery, and on the terrace, which as you can see, most of the spaces, the communal spaces of the building that are not private offices, are very green and very integrated to the city. This is one of the first LEED silver buildings that were approved here in Ecuador. And other than the greenery, it has a whole bunch of things that are very eco-friendly building. But this is what you see. This is what you see when you're on the terrace. It's not just a green roof, but it's a very, very what would you call? You sort of feel like you're in a house more than a building itself. And then the relationship to these elements, like those concrete walls that sort of frame views toward the city, and then you look to the mountain. But it's about these buildings that start to bring a little more than just architecture and aesthetics to the city, but a little more conscious also. This is a building we just finished very, very few months ago, I think. Yeah, very few months ago. And it's also an apartment building in the city, which is very dense. It's a 15-story building, but it sort of works around this big atrium or courtyard that sort of brings all the elements of a more sustainable building. It works as brings all the air from the bottom and exits on the top. Natural ventilation for all the circulation towards the units go around this big atrium. So whether you're coming in or exiting your apartment, you're always relating to this light-filled space. And then you have these little elements that hold plants and trees in the air that go all along randomly above, all along the building, the atrium, and end up on a green terrace on the top. The scale of this building is very, very interesting in terms of this big closed concrete walls versus these circulations and these little boxes of vegetation that sort of start randomly to appear all around, all up into the project. And this last project I'm going to show you in terms of this idea of sustainability we're working on, it's actually started construction already. It's a big office, not office mostly, I mean apartments mostly, but it's got some office on the bottom. It's a mixed-use project. And that's something that it's interesting for us to talk about, which is the city's promoting this idea of sustainability by letting you build taller buildings as long as you comply with a more sustainable agenda, which the city sort of gives you. So these were all the different versions we worked on. We started with a more simple, elegant idea, and the developer, which is one of the biggest developers here, sort of started telling us he wanted a little more, something more crazy, you know, do something a little more crazy, smoke something, I don't know, whatever. And then we started going a little more crazy. We started with these ideas going, and then towards the end, we started going a little less crazy because the project goes through the budget, and that's what usually ends up happening. And so the last image is sort of the project that we're going to be building. It's still sort of in some changes right now, but it's this idea that the city sort of, instead of building a 12-story tower, which is what you see around the building, it lets you build 50 or 100% more area and stories, as long as you really compromise and working on a greener building. So these ideas that are working here, and hopefully these are a little bit of the first projects that are being done like that. So hopefully it's going to work, and it's going to make a big difference here in the city. Obviously, the city is going to change a lot because the city is going to start growing taller. But it's this idea that cities start to sort of work in a smaller nucleus where all the activities are around where you live, where you work. There's a metro. There's a metro being built in the city, which is going to have these centralities that are going to be these places where you can have these taller buildings and have a more compact type of living, which is what the city is trying to promote. And now I'm going to go a little deeper into two projects that we're sort of, as I said, talk about a lot of the ideas that I that I talked about before. One of them is the Natura Building, which is a project we finished 2 years ago. This is where we have our office. My partner Felipe lives here also. There's 70% of it's a mixed-use project. 70% of the project is office space, and 30% is residential. There's only 5 apartments and around 25 offices. But it's a project that we enjoyed a lot and are very proud of, because it talks about a lot of the ideas and the way we want to start living and projecting buildings as architects. This is, as I showed you in one of the first images, you have the city, which is on this plateau, and then over the hill you have all these valleys that are growing very fast. And this is in one of those valleys, which is the one that's pretty much growing the fastest. And What's nice is that it's still situated, as you can see here, on a very green area. Very, it used to be a more residential area. Now that's changing a lot. There's a few buildings more getting built here. But it's a building that really talks about the way of life that you have on these valleys, which is a direct contact to nature, which is a little less evident in the city, which is a little harder, a little less green. And how you want to start projecting these buildings that are not only these houses that sit on these open landscapes, but they're a little more dense, but really respond to these ideas of climate, of topography, of nature, of greenery, and materiality. It's more, they're wider, they're a little fatter. So we started understanding this place as a very green, very low-key type of place. There are still a lot of residential houses here. So we thought that we really had to maintain and respect the greenery, the scale, and the relationship of the building to the street and to the neighborhood. Even though this was going to be an office building, we didn't want to do this very open, very permeable building, but something that respected and went with the materiality of the surrounding houses and context, and maybe turn it outside in. So what really matters and becomes important is what's happening on the inside. This is the first part is some diagrams that talk about the site itself. There's a one-story difference in levels from the street side towards the back of the site. And as you can see, there were a bunch of really old and important trees that we wanted to save, and we didn't want to come in and do a rasa tabla, but instead of sort of maintain as much of the greenery as we could. There were a few trees that weren't worth much, but most of the trees were old trees and important trees that we wanted to maintain. So pretty much the layout and how the plan works is a response to these trees that happened either on the back side where most of the trees were, on the middle of the site, and how this U-shaped plan starts to work within these and outs, ins and outs, that start to respect and leave these existing trees alone, which when the project was finished were part of, it seemed like the building had been here for a really long time, and that's because we kept all these really old trees, which is the most important thing we wanted to do within this project. As I said, there's this U-shaped project, which from the outside works as a very enclosed, silent, and discreet building. As you can understand, all this neighborhood, which is mostly residential around it, always has this fear of this bigger building coming to I don't know, contaminate this smaller scale type of neighborhood. So that's something we would really want to be careful with. It's only a 3-story building, and it's, first of all, it's a very enclosed facade with few punctured windows and openings towards the street. So there's a big privacy between the office spaces and the existing neighborhood. But it's a very, very permeable and open space on the ground floor, which is really the main idea of what we wanted to do towards the context. It's a white brick construction mostly, and some exposed concrete in terms of how these brick walls are sustained, and this materiality starts to talk to the neighborhood. A lot of the houses across the street and next door are brick houses. Some are white brick. So we wanted to do this very contemporary building, which talked about this new modernity, I would say, in the valley, which is a little more traditional and rustic type of architecture. But the materiality helped us a lot in terms of achieving that sort of low-key, more traditional type of architecture. Sort of reminds me of Alvar Aalto in terms of how he managed to do these very present and modern buildings, but really related to the context and the country, right? As I said, it opens up through this series of patios and openings and exterior gardens and spaces. And what happens is, as you can see on the left of the drawing, it goes from these sort of filters from the street, which are these green gardens and patios, and this very enclosed sort of blind facade toward the street, into this 3.5-story atrium, which sort of explodes once you come in. So it's that's something we really try to do in our projects, which is not sort of discover while we arrive at the project, and how we move around the project, we start discovering, and that's something that happens. It's a big surprise here, because from the outside, you don't really expect what's going on the inside, which is this really big 3-story space that circulates towards the perimeter offices or apartments through these stairs that connect, open stairs and bridges that serve all the different levels of this U-shaped configuration. And again, the light towards the material, which is for us something that we really gotta take advantage of. It's what brings these materials to life, this Quito sun, which is really amazing. And then again, the white brick contrasted with the wood, which wanted to sort of do a little more contrast with a warmer material, which is what we've done on the inside. It's a place where during the day sort of promotes people not only moving from place to place in this big atrium and circulations, open circulations, but through a series of stairways, sitting areas. There's even sort of like outdoor tables and chairs where people have lunch, go work on their computer there, sort of like a co-working areas, outside co-working areas, which are very, very successful in terms of how people relate inside the building. So we wanted to make this space not only for the use of the office or the people who work there, but for other types of activities too. This is a yoga class, being instructed by my wife, which is the one on the left. When she told me she wanted to do this, I told her I see enough of her at home. Why did she want to come to my office? But I was just kidding. And this is the type of activities that we want to promote in these areas. We want to do some art installations, art exhibits, yoga classes, to make this space the liveliest we can, as much as it is already with the people who work and move around these open areas. As you can see, there's from the left, which is the street level, the atrium sort of terraces down to the right, and ends up in this garden, which you see on the top right picture, through these stairs and platforms, ends up in this big area of greenery, which was most of the existing trees of the site, and it's open on the bottom. So what happens is the air comes in and usually comes up to the other side or on the top of the atrium, and it's a very fresh, even though there's a lot of sunlight coming in, it's a very tempered and nice place to be in. But again, you see the idea, and this is probably what a series of images that are what excite us mostly about the project, which is this idea of working and living in this very, very green and old landscape that existed in the original site. So this is what we worked from the top image on the left, which is all this greenery hanging from these levels on the atrium, all the way to these gardens on the back, and how they relate to the different spaces. So being these really old buildings, for example, on the image on the bottom left, our office is on the top floor, but we have these trees that go from the 4th story down all the way up, and an outside space we have in our office. It's very nice to be related to these top of these trees and the views, etc. So this is a project that sort of works with all the ideas that we talked about before, in terms of being able to have a piece of architecture that talks about materiality, space, greenery, sustainability, and the relationship and how it deals with the context in the city, which is really, really important to us. A few more images of this. This is an office space on the left and an apartment on the right. A courtyard for an apartment on the left. On the bottom right is our office. This is, I think, the last time our office was this clean and neat. For this picture, it's pretty messy right now, but this whole idea of bringing the materiality into the place and the views and these courtyards with these existing trees is pretty much the whole idea of this really nice project. And the last project I'm going to show you is one that we finished not very long ago. I think it was a month ago or so. They're just moving into the project. And the story of this project is very interesting because it's a really good client. We designed the house for the owner of this business, which is it's a business that sells melaminic panels. I don't know if that's what you call them, but it's they use those for doing all types of cabinetry, kitchens, and they sell. It's the biggest company in Latin America, so they've grown a lot. And the top image is what they used to have. This is what we found in the site when they invited us. The program for the project they asked us for was their new corporate offices. This is where the plant was. This is a big industry. And what we saw when we came in, there's a big highway that rises towards this building. We saw two things that sort of got our attention, which was this big sort of irregular lawn, inclined lawn that sort of sat in front of the big industry and what they wanted really was for us to design a 3 or 4 story building that sat on a little parking area that they had on the left. You see the picture on the right, the bottom right. There's on the left side all those cars. That was a parking area they had, and you can also see it on the site plan. And that's what they saw and told us they wanted to build their offices. But when we got there, we got really excited about this sort of snake-like area, green area, which they didn't know what to do with it. They were just going to leave it like that. The plant was going to also grow. They've grown their production to almost twice as much. So that big triangular area behind that green site was also going to change. It was going to grow the plant also. And what we proposed, which at the beginning they weren't very sure about, was that instead of building in that smaller flat parking area, which was going to give us, in terms of the area we needed, about a 3 or 4 story building, we proposed that we maybe should build in this sinuating place where, you know, at the beginning, it seemed unbuildable. It seemed like it was too narrow. And we did a series of studies where in both plan and these sort of ideas and drawings that started to explain that it could be done and it would be a much interesting and better working project for them. It was only going to be a 2-story project, a more horizontal type of working space, which is what they really needed. We came up with something like this. The plant, which is those white volumes, sort of grew a little more towards that parking area that you saw before, and it ended up leaving these wedge or teeth-like shapes. So what we proposed was that the main building, the main facade of the plant, which used to be nothing, instead of having this 4-story little block, would be this really long horizontal building that would be sort of the new facade or the face of the project, where you would still see the plant on the back, the industry plant, but it would sort of give them a new image, a new face to what they had, which wasn't very nice before. And so what we proposed was this very elongated snake-like project, which sat on this site, irregular site. And between this long project, long building, and the actual buildings on the back, we were going to build sort of the support spaces like cafeterias, all the service areas, lockers. They have about 500 employees there that work in the 24 hours shifts. So it was going to be how to contain all this new project against the old plant, and then start to bring these new gardens and open areas between these two areas that relate the two parts of the project. And this is what we ended up having, and what ended up convincing them of the idea, which was seeing this industry through the face of this new, really permeable, open building towards the street and towards the highway. That is pretty much what you see when you come in. It's a very visible building from the highway, from when you're driving through there. And what we told them we wanted to do was, since they produce these melaminic panels that they use for all kinds of architecture and interior and finishings, was that we wanted to do a building that was pretty much, the architecture was the structure. It was a concrete structure, and their panels, and their melaminic panels. That was pretty much going to be, well, we had the glass and the envelope also, but there wasn't going to be much materiality in terms of finishings, but it was just going to be the concrete and the wood, the melaminic wooden panels that they produce. This is what, it's a very basic floor plan, but those sort of teeth on the back, those walls to the walls are what the new plant, the extension ended up being. And this is what I was telling you. You have that long, really elongated, irregular, sort of curvy building on the front towards the street, which is a very open office areas. You have against the back buildings of the plant, you have a cafeteria, which is that open triangular space with kitchens, all the services, and you have these green open areas that sort of filter the two sides of the between the office and the cafeterias. And on the left, that other residual triangular space, we ended up putting all the changing rooms, bathrooms, batteries, everything they needed for their workers to use. So we proved them that even though it was only a 24-foot width of the building, it could work perfectly well as a horizontal plane. And in the middle of that snake, it got a little, it was sort of like a belly, which got a little more deeper, which is what we end up doing is putting this atrium, a 2-story atrium that connects the 2 levels of the office space, and connects directly to that green garden space on the back. So we sort of argued that instead of doing this 3 or 4 story building that wasn't going to have much connection between the users, we really wanted to make this more horizontal, open way of working and sort of relating of the people. This is one of the first renderings that we did of that main atrium. And you sort of start seeing our idea of doing this all concrete building in terms of what the structure, everything is exposed. All the slabs on the top are exposed. Most of the electrical and all the systems are within the slabs are very few seen. So pretty much the structure was pretty much going to be the architecture of the building, and then we're just going to contrast it with a few finishings with their own material, which is those wooden floors and ceilings and stuff like that, and walls. There's a few studies. That watercolor on the right is one of the original ideas that sort of gotten hooked on the potentiality of this idea, and then some drawings on the top of the atrium in the section, also being a very steep site towards the bottom. Here you can see the section. We do a lot of also models and section models. You can see the relationship of the building, the atrium, the relationship to the view on the right, but also to the back of the garden and the cafeteria, which is going to have direct visual relationship between the building and the back. These are some construction photos. I show you because since we thought that the building was going to be pretty much only sort of a showing or demonstration of the structure, that was going to be the architecture itself. We really thought through in terms of what we wanted to do with the structure. It wasn't a structure that was going to be later on covered by finishings and facades, but the whole architecture is part of this vocabulary. So we ended up doing these 2 rows of columns all around this wavy shaped building, and then we're going to have these angled sides on that ended up being started going from the beams that hold the columns towards these very thin slabs on the front, which made it a very, very delicate sort of plates that we're going to be seen on the front of the building all around this long facade. What we also ended up doing was, since part of this building, because of the angle of the wavy form, faced afternoon light and sun, we did this system of louvers, which is this right here, made of their own material. So it's incredible because they have no reservations in terms of using all the material they wanted. They would have made the sinks out of their material if they could have done it. But so that was a real pleasure in terms of doing this sort of skeleton box and just using a few finishes with their own material that they could use as much as they could. Here on the drawing on the left, you can see it's just the structure, sort of some of the piping and technical stuff hidden within the slabs, and then what's represented in yellow is the contrast to their material. That was it. It's just a very simple but very powerful building. The image on the top is during construction, and we haven't taken real professional pictures yet of this building, but I'm going to show you a few that we took. This is the finished building on the bottom. And this is what I was talking about, making this, instead of bringing the green buildings, which aren't very nice, to the first plane, it sort of go to the background with this new facade that pretty much extends all along the site. This is, as I said, these aren't very good pictures, but this is the finished area. This is the main atrium. This is that big staircase that they do a bunch of workshops and a bunch of activities there. And then the circulation around the atrium that serves the offices on the right. It's, again, a very luminous building, a lot of greenery. Since it's a very narrow building, there's no need for much artificial light. Most of the light comes from both sides of the windows, so it's works very well in terms of how energetic function. This is an image of the parking area that goes right into the atrium, and as the image on the right, which isn't finished, but you can see the dynamism of the shape of the building, which is what we saw on the first day we visited that place, and said this is where it has to be. This is this sinuous curve and these beams and very sort of sexy shapes that make it a space more interesting than just having an orthogonal rectilinear building. And again, you see the materialities, just these concrete walls and floorings that contrast with these wooden panelings on the floors, on the ceilings, and on the offices that are more enclosed on the left. And I guess that's it. I'm going to stop there. There's one more project, but I'm going to start there because I think that's it. So thank you very much for your time. I hope it wasn't too long, and I'm ready for any questions if you have any. Thank you.
Gonzalo, thank you. That was spectacular. Your camera's off now. I don't know if you're aware of that.
Hold on. Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned to you before we started, if you had come to RPI and you would have presented in the Nicholas Grimshaw building, there would have been a wonderful ovation. And I mean this sincerely. The work is absolutely spectacular, and it was interestingly. But well, before I start, I did write a little note to everyone in the chat, and Gonzalo would be thrilled if you were to ask some questions.
Yes.
I urge all of you guys to think of it. Any question is a good question, but it's really about participation and community. And
yep.
Although I could sit here for hours and raise a series of issues that I think are relevant and provocative in the context of opening up a discussion with Gonzalo. It's really about you guys. This is a teaching, learning opportunity.
Don't be shy. If I gave a lecture with my shaky English, you can ask a few questions with no problem.
But I'll start off a few observations and then kind of go in. Maybe I'll work backwards because. Excuse me.
Bless you.
You mentioned Alva Alto, which I kind of applaud you, because we're all a product of a larger cultural continuum, and sometimes we're conscious of our influences, and other times we're not, and really doesn't make a difference. And we try to assert a certain autonomy in the sense of your own distinct voice, and yet there are traces of these influences, which is beautiful. I thought that I mean, clearly you had structured the lecture in terms of these different kinds of theoretical categories, and you placed within the buckets specific works that you thought best kind of embodied and communicate those aspirations. And then you ended the lecture in the last third with a deeper dive into two really extraordinary projects. And I'm assuming that one of the reasons why you did that is because you felt as though they represented a kind of synthesis of a series of priorities that you had spoken about as kind of, again, independent ideals. And I acknowledge that, and I applaud you, because it seemed to me that they took off in terms of their level of sophistication and the kind of elegance and ease to which you were able to manage all the considerations as simultaneously as a kind of holistic project. So, for example, the first one, Natura, if I'm saying that correctly.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
You had, it seemed to me when you start the lecture off by affirming the fact that the plan, the orientation of your building units are often determined by the views and the landscapes. And so there's a direct correlation between the juxtaposition of, let's say, the bar buildings and their orientation in relation to the views they capture, which is quite beautiful. And so this permeability and this relationship between inside and outside might be more about views and vistas. And then when you come into the city, there's a whole series of urban projects which highlight the fact that you deeply appreciate the negative space either in front of a building or in the interior of a building as a place of kind of public theater. And I thought that Natura project became a tour de force for you conceptually and ideologically, because you actually brought the city on the inside. You made a new
Yes.
type of city, and you did it in the most lyrical way. It wasn't it went well beyond just a kind of planning proposition. There was a whole series of screens and material relationships and circulation systems and so forth. I'd be interested within the context of a kind of active public space, which I'm reminded of Lita Babardi, who the first time I encountered her work, it totally blew me away, and it was radical for me, given that I'd never had never encountered anything quite like that. That someone would actually appropriate a massive territory of space at the bottom of a building, for instance, and leave it empty because she understood that the city would fill it up. Can you speak a little bit more about how public space is interpreted in Ecuador? In other words, there might be a school of thought around this, a legacy or lack thereof. And then where do you see yourself in relation to that historical context?
That's a great question, because it's something that we're not interested only in doing individual buildings, whether they're good or not so good, but as that big component of the talk, which was the city and how it relates all these projects, whether they are on a less urban or a more urban context. Here, when I talked about the colonial city, the old colonial city, and it is one of the most amazing places you can go, I think, in the world. In Latin America, definitely it's the most well conserved and one of the biggest ones. That tradition of urbanity and urban living and the living within the city and walking and connecting as old, European city. You have to remember that this city was built by the Spaniards, which brought these ideas of this compact urban city where everything happened there. That still works there. Sometimes not so well, but we do have that tradition here in Quito of this old, really, really urban way of life. You have to think that up until my grandparents, we were talking a city that was built in the 1500s, and up to my grandparents, everybody lived so the city started growing exponentially since the 1950s, towards the north and then towards the south. So up to my grandparents, there was this idea of a small urban living city, which was very beautiful and very successful. Right. It is really, really sad to say that nowadays the city has grown very, very fast in the past 30, 40 years. But the public realm and the public way of life hasn't caught up with that. There was good city planning, I would say, in the 60s, 50s, 60s, but in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and now, well, I would say now maybe there's a bigger conscious, but it's a little too late now. the city is a city that maybe in a couple of areas works well in a public realm in terms of activity, whatever the important activities of a city are. But the rest is a city that works through the car, that is very enclosed. As I showed you, most buildings build their walls around it. Security is a big issue here. So the city, instead of opening up more and more to the city and people having this more public, open way of life in the city, people are sort of closing up against, away from the city. Mostly it's security. Right now, another issue is that public projects haven't been managed well. As you know, the best public projects aren't usually the ones that are a result of a good architect or a good planner, but of also a good public administration. And that's what cities like Colombia and Medellin, or even the States, what's happening in the big cities in the States, which are transforming the cities into these incredible urban areas and public spaces. That's starting to change a little bit, but it's not always done by the best people, the best architects. And so I think that's the most frustrating aspect of working here in terms of me. I am somebody who goes to, whenever I've been to Europe, and enjoy that city living in these cities where they're big or small, and the cafe shops and the plazas and the walking. You come back here, you have these other beautiful, the scenery, the other types of benefits. But that's something that really frustrates me and sort of depresses me, that here in Quito and the whole Ecuador, maybe there's one city called Cuenca that maybe you should also sort of look it up. It's similar to what Quito used to be 60 years ago. A smaller city, very cultural, also has a cultural center, a historic center. But the new projects that they've been doing there's a lot of public intervention and a lot of public activity being built. So what can I say? It's very frustrating in terms of us being an architect and not being able to experience that. So whenever we're hired to do these, as I show you, these private buildings, because in the end they're not public, we sort of do what's in our whatever we can to at least give these little pieces of city to our buildings and vice versa. So
No,
hopefully it will change.
That's a great answer. I appreciate that. I have two responses on that note. One is that a city, in theory, could be a classroom, and that your buildings could serve as a kind of didactic device where it generates a certain amount of conversation, provocation, and even teaches maybe others around you about the opportunities afforded with architecture as a kind of urban actuator. So I'm sure that's happening independent of you, because you've completed the projects and they've marked the city in a beautiful way. The other thing I'm reminded of, I don't know if you should check out his work. His name is Seung Sang, SEUNGH-SANG. I can send you this. He's a great architect from South Korea, and he established a really close relationship with the president of South Korea, or the former president of South Korea. And as a result, he became the chief architect for Seoul, and for that matter, maybe around the entire country. And he was able to influence planning and code and policy and funding and everything. And this guy is not political. He's a really wonderfully creative, poetic architect, but he recognized that he had to get into that space if he wanted to help his country. And he's had a huge impact. And it's very rare to see a position like that being established in any country in the world. I just point that out because it seems to me, from the conversation we've had prior to your lecture and what I'm learning about you and your partner, that you're in the forefront as architects in Ecuador, and that's a beautiful place to be, and it also comes with a lot of responsibility. So
Yes.
in the context of trying to offer greater insight and direction about how cities might evolve, which you guys are certainly doing some beautiful things, it's a model to consider. That's all.
Yes, I mean, don't think that we haven't thought about it, and I mean, I can think of many really good architects with really good intentions who've tried it. There's a friend of mine. She's an architect who worked with us for a while, and she somehow is involved with pretty much the municipality in terms of the city, which is what is going to make a difference here. But it's very difficult. It's very difficult. I think has a lot to do with where you work, the country you work, even the city you work. There are municipalities in Ecuador that work really well. We've had some really big problems with the last mayor in terms of corruption, and so sort of there hasn't. It's not that people haven't tried it, and some really good options have been there to make a difference. But and the little that has changed is because of these people. But it's very difficult. A lot of people go in there with the best intentions, and after 3-4 months, they say I can't do anything here. It's enough. Corruption is going to kill me. It's developing countries, you know. It's not. I'm not saying that there's not corruption in the States, but these countries are corruption is serious. So
I get it.
And the lack of money, and the money goes where it shouldn't go. So it's really a struggle, and it's difficult. It's very difficult. But I agree completely. That's the city in Medellin, Colombia. Why the city changed and made such huge difference, because it came from inside the government, and they were the ones who made the difference with great architects and doing these open competitions. And so it's a model that hopefully someday will change. And I agree completely with you, but it hasn't been easy. It hasn't been easy.
Yeah. No. I appreciate that. And I'm going to now transition over to asking some of the questions that we've just received. But I just want to underscore the fact that the reason why I raised that, it certainly wasn't intended as a form of criticism. In fact, I thought your work was.
No, but it should be. It should be.
No, it was incredibly provocative as an intervention that could generate change. And I wanted to remind the students that there are many forms of the agency of architecture can manifest in a variety of ways, and one is through design as architect.
Yeah, and by example, we, as I say, it's working with the city and trying to change things. I'm not saying it's impossible, but it's very difficult. We were once involved in a very public project that we sort of got together with other architects trying to, nothing really came out of that. But I think don't worry about trying to criticize that, because if somebody has the responsibility, is us, people who have access to do and are working in the city and are doing things in the city. So what we've done is, within the comfort of our office and our work, try to do things that make a difference and make other people see. And believe me, Natura has been incredible. Other than winning a few prizes in terms of the city and Biennale here in Ecuador, it has raised a lot of questions and new visions in terms of what architecture should be. The idea of the mixed use, the mixed use, people moving. We did this project in the valley because a lot of people live in the valley and commute to the city, huge traffic, huge, and this, we wanted to promote this idea of, this more concentrated living where you can do everything, this whole sustainable idea that there is no big mystery and everybody knows about it. But as you said, it's very easy to do it. Well, you have the work and you can put all your energy and beauty into it. Getting into that other situation, first of all, we would have to lose a lot of time of our office because it's a compromise that you really have to put a lot of time into. So I do agree with you. It's very easy to do it and to talk about all these things and try to do it in individual projects, but the real challenge is to get out of your comfort zone and try to make a difference for real, I think.
Right. Well, I think you're doing it. Okay, this first question is from Angie. Thank you for the beautiful lecture. Your work and English is incredible. She wanted
Sometimes
you to know that. I wanted to ask, what is the most challenging aspect of creating projects in Quito compared to building in more rural areas? Can the two conditions ever be compared?
I didn't understand. Building in Quito versus building in more rural areas?
In rural areas. I suppose she's looking at the juxtaposition between your first set of houses and then when you move into the city. Yeah.
Definitely building in the city is more challenging. Doing these private houses or small projects, whether they're not houses or definitely has its challenges in terms of the client, the budget, all the typical things that are not always easy to work with, but make the work interesting versus the city, which is a whole different, first of all, responsibility, the same as we were talking before. The whole process of working, because every project in the city, every project in the country really has to go through this permit process, everything. But the city has very, very strict laws in terms of planning. And so I say the city because one thing that we are really against as architects here, and things have changed a little bit, but it's also something that we have gotten involved with other architects, is that the laws for building and zonings and everything is too square. Everything, every lot has the same zoning in terms of and they don't see projects as generators of change in terms of, okay, maybe we should analyze this project and this different proposal, and it can go maybe a little off the strict laws of the site it has, but it can be a benefit for the city. But everything is very square and everything. So making architecture and making changes also sometimes difficult because you're sort of handcuffed in terms of the regulations of the city, which are too strict and very close-minded, I would say. I would say that is the biggest difference. In terms of the rest, clients, budgets, everything, I think maybe in bigger projects a little more difficult and more complex. You have to deal with more people, but it's just the same in every project, I think.
Okay, great answer. Thank you. This is from Katrina. She's a faculty member in the school. Gonzalo, thank you for the presentation and bold focus on materials in the interplay of public and private spaces throughout the body of work. I teach a professional practice class where we focus design development students on the understanding of code requirements, material properties, and costs, specifically how they become part of the tool palette of design. In each case, you presented a modular approach that was individualized to the program, material availability, and the skill of the laborers. What can you share with us about the regulatory or economic processes that you traverse in executing these visions? Great question.
It's let me see if I understand the question right. What you're trying to find out is regulatory and economic aspects of doing this idea of materiality and the labor works. Is that what you're saying? What exactly? Can you resume? I didn't hear the last part.
Maybe if Katrina, if you want to send a follow-up statement,
Okay, or can I speak it?
Yeah.
For it,
Better,
yes.
that's better.
Okay.
Sorry if I didn't understand what your question.
That's okay. You answered some of my question in your previous answer when you were talking about how the regulatory situation was very rigid.
Yes.
But if you could speak a little bit more about material availability, because you did focus on that, and the skill of the laborers. Certainly, we have seen in the state certain areas don't have masons anymore. They've fallen out of practice. But if you could talk a little bit about that, because the scale of materials in all of your projects was very important to you.
Yes, that's one of the things that make our practice, I wouldn't say different from the rest, because we're not the only ones working with these different materials, but materials here, what's very available and what we try to work with are very local materials. I'm not saying that you can find, aluminum composites to put on your facade, but we're not that interested in that, because, as I said, local and natural materials like wood, stone, brick, even mud brick or mud walls that are more traditional in use are still very, very easy to use, and there's a lot of it to work with. There's especially in terms of stone and masonry, there's a lot of availability in terms of those type of materials. And most of all, other than having this great craftsmanship and hand labor, which is cheap and very qualified and still works very well here, I think goes a little more, goes beyond that. I think it's a little more of what we were talking before in terms of traditional culture, in terms of sort of reinterpreting a more contemporary vision of architecture with this tension between these older traditional building and materials with these new ones. So that interests a lot. We're not too happy with projects that are, all materials brought from China or the States, with these, because here architecture has an identity that is very, very strong, and a tradition that is very strong. So we are interested in architecture and how we can blend or even find tensions between these new technologies, new ways of building with older materials and older technologies also. So also happens that buildings here sort of end up, when they're finished, looking better when they're done by these more qualified people than when they bring these new technologies that are new to the city. And also the aging of the buildings, I think buildings we've done that have already 10, 12, 15 years with local and natural materials really age well. That's why I brought up Alto also into the conversation. Materials that concrete is a contemporary material, you would say, in terms of modernity, but the aging of the buildings, and even though the weathering and the stone, the wood, everything looks better even if it's aged and old. So those are things that we really think about when we design our projects and how we assemble these materials. So I hope I answered your question, but there's a lot of availability in those. So it interests us to find this duality between old and new.
Yeah, I want to ask another question from the audience, but I do want to say, Katrina, it's an interesting question for a variety of reasons, because it's not just the economics of the material in terms of its acquisition, but the fact that it's specific to an economy that's local to where they're building, which means that you're giving back to the community, right?
Yes.
Rather than import materials outside the country and so forth. But it also speaks to, which is maybe a question that a conversation we'll have a little later, which has to do with your interest in certain cultural imprints. In other words, the material, the inscription of the formwork, for instance, the wood formwork, has certain associations, and not only in terms of its method of construction, but maybe a whole legacy of how concrete or earth has been used in the context of building for over many, many years, and your desire to retain some inscription of that cultural memory.
Exactly, and it's not only the cheapness, the availability, but that's what I was talking about, the tradition in terms of there are so many things you learn with these people every day on job sites. You specify a type of detail, whether it's on the wood form or the way we want to install a stone wall, or and you learn so much from these people who have these, I don't know, hundreds of years of ancestry of learning and passing the knowledge from generation to generation. And it definitely makes a big difference economic in terms of the local, people right now. There's a lot of companies bringing these new materials for windows, for all types of, and obviously that's a good business for them. But all these other people and communities that live off this really makes a difference. It's more difficult in bigger buildings because we need a little more refinement in terms of technology, but in smaller houses we really work with artisans that we use the same carpenter for or three different carpenters for the same houses. We call the same guy up to do that. So it's people who are part of our lives and part of our work every day. It's not just, okay, we want to specify something different, call the company and bring it in. But it's you build relationships, you build, and that makes a big difference when you work and you propose your work. It's really gratifying. It's really joy.
That's a very important comment. This is from Arian. Thank you, Gonzalo. Your work is stunning and truly inspirational. Would you talk a bit more about the wide range of media you use to explore your projects, i.e. models, sketches, watercolors, renderings, and how this approach enhances your design process? Is this typical for architects and designers in Ecuador and Quito? And I would just add, in the context, she's referring to certain media. I would add, what are some of your inspirations as well?
That's a great question, because I'm in love with drawing, and first of all, I was trained in when I finished school in '99, AutoCAD and renderings were already starting to go into the profession and the schools. But I would say that 70–80% of my classmates in that whole promotion did our thesis work by hand and building models with your hand. And I don't know if you can see, but this is a model that was, all these models are built by hand. They're not laser cut or not. So that part of the profession that is not only the design, but the process and how you represent the design is really, really interesting and important to us. I would answer in the question saying that less and less, at least here, the traditional mediums of work for architects are sort of disappearing. I wouldn't say disappear, but obviously technology and the computer are, I think, worldwide sort of taking over the more traditional drawing processes. And but being a cliche or not, I do believe that whole process of sitting and drawing, and not only sketching and resolving, the trace paper, but that whole idea of how you represent your ideas and doing a drawing that is not only to resolve a problem, but to represent an idea, even if it's only for the people in the office to think about it, or that has no replacement with either the computer or the renderings. And we think renderings are obviously a part of the way we work, and we use the medium of the computer, and we've even used Grasshopper. There's these new guys in our office who who every time more they're really into these new technologies where we sort of accept them but look at them from a little afar.
Yeah.
But it's incredible how they lose the idea of representation more than the process itself, because the process can be made. I mean, a model made by hand or the end result is sort of the same, but it's that process and the idea of representation. How you represent your ideas is very important to us, and I would say that we are one of the offices that draws and builds the most models here. We really not only think it's important for the development, but we really enjoy that process. So yeah, we do a lot of, I do a lot of watercolors, I do a lot of drawing, and it ends up in the end in these presentation renderings and in these construction drawings, and it ends up in the same. But I do think that part of that sensibility that we have in our work has a lot to do with how we develop and the mediums that we use. I don't want to sound old-fashioned, but
No.
I do think that traditional way of working and that idea of the drawing and the mind and the eye and the idea that you build a model, a study model, and that sort of brings 10 more ideas in terms of what you want it to do. It makes a whole difference, and it's very important that people don't lose that. We use SketchUp, we use renderings, we use Rhino, everything we use same, but I would say it's an office that really works on those types of processes and mediums, and our processes that at least in schools here are being lost. They invite us to juries in schools for projects or theses, and you see these ideas or drawings with not much life and not much, you don't see the ideas in the drawings. You see these very plain AutoCAD drawings that don't tell you much. And so that's one thing that we're working with a lot of schools here, because we do have relationships with schools, that whether it's hand-drawn or painting or computer drawings or Photoshop or whatever, more than the medium itself on how you represent, it's how you process and represent your ideas.
That's the key.
Whatever it is.
Yeah,
I mean, I'm not saying that people have to keep drawing by hand like I do.
Right.
And kids hearing my lecture may think I'm an old guy, but whatever it is you do, it's about how you don't lose that force and that power of representation, which has been what is architecture.
No. This is a look. You and I could probably spend a good hour on this alone, and we probably don't want to. But I just want to say to the students who are listening, don't misinterpret what he's saying. On one hand, everyone moves through their architectural education in a different era, and it comes with a different set of tools and media, and one becomes accustomed to them, but they think critically through those mediums. And while they're fundamentally different than the ones, and I'm talking about the watercolors, for instance, than the computer that these guys are working with now, and the models are similar because they're building with models. There is something that I did want to again call attention to, because I thought the watercolors were extraordinary, not only because you have a beautiful hand, you draw really well, which means that there's a spontaneity and a kind of there's a kind of electricity that moves from anyone who draws well, right, between your mind, your head, your heart, and the piece of paper. So it's an extension of your imagination. But I would call attention to the fact, again, to the students, he's looking for the identity of the building, often through perspectival vantage points. In other words, what would you see if you stood in that particular point, coordinate in space, whether you're looking out of the building into the landscape, whether you're looking through the facade into a courtyard, whether you're looking from a tower out into the city, because those perspectival drawings inform the design priorities of the scheme. They're not post assignment drawings, and maybe I'm speaking for you on this one. They're not
No,
intended
it's
to
exactly
promote
what it
the
is.
building to the developer as much as they're teaching learning opportunities. They're part of the process, and kind of processional interrogation of the work. And that's really, really important. And we've lost in this era the recognition that the body and the eye needs to move through space and becomes one of a number of different points of reference from which to develop the architecture.
Exactly. And the final presentation drawing, you can hire somebody to do it. You know, the client, usually a lot of the renderings we present to clients, we don't even do them here in the office. You know, what we do in the office is, even whether it's computer or not, it's a process to inform your process of design, for you to get new ideas, for you to understand what you're trying to do, for you to understand the space you're trying to make, and whatever the medium, as I said, that's what's important. It's not a final presentation drawing that you do at the end once everything is already designed. Somebody else can do those for you, you know.
Yeah, and I love to have you come to RPI at some point and see the kind of work we do. And
that would be great.
Although it's different, it is different, and that's good. I'd like to think that there's a criticality that the tools these kids are using now are incredibly powerful, and quite honestly, there's kind of a reverse logic that has to be applied, which is that with all this speed and computational power, you have to be far more conscious of your priorities insofar as you're setting up a strategy of resistance to highlight or privilege something that's more important than something else. And that's different than the era that you and I grew up in. I'm a little older than you. It was even before the computer, where things were slow and deliberate and incremental. And so it's not that one is better than the other, but they require a rigorous mind and a critical thought process to kind of direct the creative production.
Yes.
So I'm moving over to Gustavo Krembel. In fact, I believe I mentioned him to you earlier. He's one of the great faculty I have in the School of Architecture, and he oversees our Argentina and Chile program. Let's see here. And he says, thank you, Gonzalo, for giving us insight to your work. I have two quick questions. The first one is, could you give some information about your education as an architect, your background? That's a really important one that I was going to address, but I'm happy Gustavo brought it up. And the second one, could you offer a quick panorama of the emerging Ecuadorian architecture scene? Who are the new architects to track?
I could spend an hour on that, but it's a big issue. Well, in terms of education, I went to school in DC, Catholic University, for 4 years, and then I went to Syracuse. And it was a good combination, I think, because Catholic was, I think, a little more liberal in terms of Syracuse when I was there, which I graduated in '99, was still a little more traditional. So I went from a more liberal to a more traditional, more theoretical school. But I think I had, Syracuse gave me a very traditional way of training in a way, you know, like, I think Syracuse has changed a lot since then. But in terms of design, in terms of reinterpreting, for example, the thesis for me was a big part of my education. And I sort of did a project here in Ecuador, which had to do with local traditions in architecture and construction versus new. So that's something I've been, I think a lot of architects have their training, but they sort of encouraged me to think a lot of the things that I look at now in my region and in my work. So, right. So that's sort of my background. It was, as I said, more traditional computer, but most was a traditional formation, I think. I think it was a good contrast with Catholic, which was a little more liberal at that time. And the second part of the question is, it's a little more complex. It's there's this new movement here in I think in Latin America in general, but more so in Ecuador, which is this very social architecture agenda. The idea that which is really great in a way, because there are some really interesting things being done in smaller communities. These more alternative ways of viewing architecture with a more social agenda, where they work with the different communities, they build with the different communities. What I'm not too, so there's a big movement, and there's one school through a big leader, which is a Spanish architect who lives here in Ecuador, which is a really good architect, doesn't do much work, but this work he has done is just incredible. He's sort of taken over this discourse in this school, and it's a discourse that works very well in these developing countries, but because it's doing architecture with very little medium, with very little money, and so it's gotten very popular, you know, because everybody can be an important architect and do a little hot one by one, which is has not, but which is really good, and I'm not against it. What I'm not too fond of that movement, which has gotten pretty big here, is that, as I said, the core values and the processes of real, I'm not saying real because the other one I do think is architecture too, have gotten a little bit lost, you know. It's doing a building, whether it's a house or a bigger building, it's a very painstaking process,
Right.
as much as enjoyable as it is. But it's you know, the idea of working with doing drawings, real drawings to build a building, to build a detail, to build a house, to build a joint, that is being sort of replaced with people who go with the community and get a bunch of bamboo and do these tiny interventions that are very poetical, and they take these amazing pictures that and that's gotten very big, and that for people who work in Europe or in the States, it's very attractive also, you know, because it's very different, and it's but these guys in a way lose the real meaning of architecture, which is material, light, construction. In the end, it's a poetical way of constructing, and that's what architecture is. So and making beauty. So I'm not against that architecture, but it's gotten very big, and it sort of displaced architects who are doing, I'm not saying real buildings, because I keep saying that what stuff they're doing is not real, but they sort of look at you with ugly eyes, you know, like you guys are working with big buildings and then the social area, the agenda, and so I don't know. I'm not against it, but I think it's gotten overboard. And I don't agree with is that all the young people who are finishing school and going through school see this new movement as real architecture, because it's very easy to do.
Can I add something? And this is just maybe how I interpret it, because it's not necessarily specific to your country, but it represents another school of thought, which is maybe moving from the bottom up, certainly with less capital, and you could argue that it may expand in terms of community design, where there's a multiplicity of authors, some of them non-architects that are participating.
Yeah, which is great.
Right, but rather than propose, and I'm just weighing in on this, that it's an either or proposition. It seems to me that there are a multiplicity of strategies of intervening, let's say, into the city, and the modes of production can be fundamentally different, and they should both coexist. I think where the problem is, and you said it at the end of your commentary, is that there's some kind of judgment imposed on the discipline the discipline,
the traditional discipline.
the traditional discipline, as though there's some class struggle here that suggests that one is has any less integrity or kind of moral core than the other. That, to me, that's not necessary. It's not productive.
I agree completely. That's one big part of the problem, which you hit it right on the nail. The other one is that because it's this sort of ephemeral, easy architecture to do, because I can do, this tiny project and take nice pictures and get really good coverage on that, that students think that's the new, and they're not looking a little farther in terms of the real city, instead of these guys who are very talented people getting a little more involved in buildings in the city. I'm not saying that they have to start working with developers, but the cities are growing, and 98% of the projects that are being done are not really good quality, because these guys are not pushing their limits to go and do something a little more important not for themselves, because maybe they enjoy what they do and they love it, but in terms of the city. And they start discriminating these other architects who are really getting involved in bigger projects and bigger issues in the city,
Right.
So it's
interesting.
It's sort of getting these ideas, which are really valuable, and sort of making it, how would I say, they I don't know how to say it, but they're doing this, they're getting going through the easy way out. Not in terms of doing this type of architecture, but they're not getting involved in more important issues.
No, that it seems to me that it's everything's political, but it takes on a kind of partisan swerve. It's just simply not productive. But I have as much appreciation and respect for the informal as I don't the formal or the impermanence with the permanence. And but did you want to, and maybe you don't, were there certain firms that you wanted to call attention to that you thought were doing interesting work as emerging architects? Or
yes, let's see. There's a young firm, really young, and they're doing small stuff, but they're doing really interesting stuff, and it's also very traditional oriented, called Rama, R-A-M-A, Rama Studio. They're good. Let me see who else is doing some good work. There's a really good office here called Arquitectura X. They do some interesting work here. I could give you a list of a few really good architects, but I mean, there's definitely really good talent here, and some of them are just starting. They're younger generations. Some are a little older, but there's a really good group of architects from my generation or even younger that are doing some interesting things.
Yeah, I mean, and just to provide some context for the question that Gustavo was asking there, it's not about just naming names. Gustavo and I and many of my colleagues at school are really fascinated by the range and diversity of creative production within the architectural community throughout Latin America.
Yes.
And as we all know, the media, especially in the US, or for that matter everywhere, but is quite biased. And for a variety of reasons, it might privilege certain brilliant creative leaders, both young and old. And there's a lot of things happening in Latin America that are just absolutely extraordinary, and you just don't hear about it. I really enjoy kind of doing the hard work to discover architects that I hadn't known about, like you and your partner, and it's very exciting. And I think it's really important that one brings attention to the work that you guys are doing. And before I move on to another question, I just wanted to say that I didn't speak to the last project, which I actually think it's one of the most extraordinary projects that you've made, and for a variety of reasons. One of them has to do with that, and I don't want to oversimplify the work because it's not simple. There's a whole constellation of interests that you guys have, and you certainly that was part of the structure of the lecture. But there appears, and now I'm going to kind of talk about maybe the tectonics and some of the kind of formal strategies that you've been using throughout your career. One of them has been to reaffirm the kind of boundary condition of buildings through the solidity of walls, stone, concrete, and so forth. That the building type, maybe the earlier houses are probably the best example of that. Even though there's a certain degree of porosity and cutouts with windows and so forth, there's a real kind of love and appreciation for the box, either from a minimalist standpoint or for something that's a little bit more animated through wonderful diagonal juxtapositions. And I'm contrasting that interest with reaffirming the boundary as something solid with the lightness of being of the last project. That both the decision to work within a curvilinear type, but also to deploy the louver as a kind of aggregate along those surfaces, it almost dematerializes the building from certain views, right? That the edge is temporal, it's constantly moving in flux. It set up a beautiful kind of border wall screen to the inner buildings in the back. I mean, it was fantastic from a kind of planning strategy, but I think that this appears to be a kind of new territory that you've moved into. I don't see it as a stylistic move. I actually think that there's something that is moving away from a compositional, kind of the prioritizing the composition and what the building looks like, and more, in quotes, how it behaves.
Yes, and
yeah.
Yeah, I agree. Sorry to interrupt. I just wanted to add one thing to you have to remember that that's one of the things that, going back to that question of my training and it was about that classical training of composition, of facade, of even if you were studying, you know, you're trained in a modern platform, but so I would agree with you. If you look at our older buildings, they are more about that, about composition, about proportion, about now every time more and more we are more interested, whether it's about how the building responds to its use, but also in terms of how things are put together. Every time, I think that's something that maybe it's about experience. In terms of when we started, we didn't know much about construction. We didn't. You learn and learn and learn, and that's what happened to us. We become every time more. When we design our buildings now, we're, other than space and light, we're really thinking about how we're going to put them together, and materials, and about assemblage, and the response it has to other I don't know, external contexts that are not only the box, you know, the resolution of the beautiful box. So I think I agree with you, and I think this building is a big response to the context and to the use that maybe it is a departure from other work that we've done before.
Yeah. I would propose you make a film of that building. There's something very cinematic about it.
We are going to be doing some pictures in October, so, and that was one of the ideas, because it's you know, the form really says a lot about how you move in the space.
No, it's really interesting to, obviously, I'm objective because I'm approaching your work for the first time, but the last two projects seem to be, they're both far more sophisticated as a synthetic proposition in relation to your theoretical interest, but I do think they represent a pivot in your work and have moved towards a level of maturity. I mean, Alto would enjoy visiting the last two. Herman Hertzberger and Alto, and
Yes.
a few others. Ted Krieger, again, one of my distinguished faculty in the school and administrative leaders. He says here, I very much enjoyed seeing your work and process. Thank you. The sun is a powerful force, as you noted, and becomes a factor in your work. The earth is a powerful force as well. Are your design decisions influenced by seismic conditions in which you build as something to be considered, or perhaps as a partner in the creative design process?
Yeah, seismic conditions are definitely a big part of our life here. We shake every month, at least once a month.
Wow.
But more than seismic conditions, I think that idea and that observation about the earth and how we, that's why it interests me what you said about before about the lightness versus, you see most of our projects are really grounded on the earth. And that's a very traditional way of ancestral, the Incas here, the earth, the sun, and those things were, for a reason, were so important to them. So it comes from a very long tradition up to very recently. I mean, you still go to, because of the topography and all these conditions, the idea of the wall, the retaining wall, not the wall, the division wall, but it's more about containment. It's such a big part of architecture here, and we've tried to explore it in so many ways, in terms of going with it, going against, that's just that simple element as a wall has so many meanings here and so many ways to be explored. So I would agree in terms of in bigger projects. I think seismic things have much more impact because of now that we're doing taller towers and those really have big impacts here because we do live in a seismic and we're supposedly waiting for a big one to hit us soon. I don't know if it's going to happen or not, but in smaller projects, small houses, it's more about a conceptual idea of the ground than and the limits and how we limit space and the courtyard and how we shade those spaces, those exterior spaces because of the sun, and the walls and the earth and the materials that come from the earth become such a big part of our interest.
Maybe as a follow-up question to that, Gonzalo, is the role of the engineer in your office, or for that matter, experts that are highly specialized, and to what extent are they brought in the formative stage of any project, or they arrive at a point which is far more common, which is after the design has been developed and you're trying to kind of work out the technological identity of things?
Yeah, I would say that smaller projects like houses and they usually come later on because structural and technical ideas, unless there's something out of the common that sometimes we do propose, they're a little easier to pre-think or rationalize before an engineer comes. In bigger projects, and depends on what you're proposing, they definitely come much earlier. For example, Novo Pan, the last project I showed you, as I said, there's the whole project was this skeleton, concrete skeleton, which post-tension floor slabs. There's a couple of volumes, one which is the meeting room, the main meeting room is 25 feet cantilevered, and the whole way the section of the skeleton works, and those beams that sort of wing into the cantilever. We definitely work with specialists and engineers. At least in that project, it came very soon. It came very soon because the structure and the technical part was so part of the architecture of the design that we had to take a certain solid steps from the beginning. It's not something that you're going to cover later on or resolve, put a brace somewhere and not be seen. Everything had a logic and was part of the architecture in that project. So I would say in those type of projects, they come very early, and not just the structural, but and many consultants that you have to deal with in these very more complex buildings.
Gonzalo, thank you. It's 9 o'clock. I don't know what time is it there, by the way?
8.
Okay.
I can go for another hour.
No. Of course you can. But listen, I want to really thank you for taking time out. I think it's an extraordinary practice. It's an amazing body of work, and the range of brilliance in only a short period of time is quite impressive. And obviously you've got a long career ahead of you, and I can't wait to follow it and get to see some amazing things. And we're going to have you come to the school as soon as COVID is over.
Great.
I'll be able to invite friends of the school, and you're part of that family. Are there any maybe final comments or words of wisdom you want to share with the students before we leave?
Well, no, first of all, thank you for the invitation. This was more than a joy for me to be part of this. We are always happy with Felipe, me, and to be part of schools and the academic relationship. It's always very gratifying thinking that I was just a student 20 years ago. But I just wanted to say that from the little investigation that I've been able to see in what you're doing in the school and the work I've been able to see, and I also want to congratulate you because it's some really great things that I saw being done there. And RPI has always been a reference in terms of education, so no, that's something to congratulate. And hopefully, yeah, I would be awesome if I could go visit you sometime and see some things in person and meet you in person. So that's it. Thank you for the invitation, and it was so great meeting you. Thanks for everybody who listened to the whole lecture. I hope it wasn't too long, too boring, and I'm glad you liked the work. Thank you very much.
And one last question: Do you have interns in your office? If any of our
Yes, we do. Yes, we do, and we take interns all the time. All right. We do interns with a bunch of schools here, and we had people from all over the world to do interns. So
that's fantastic, because I
more than welcome. I
challenge my students to go out and apprentice.
The problem is that when they come to Ecuador, they don't want to go back.
Well, that's okay. But they should be around brilliant people like you. So Gonzalo, thank you.
No, definitely.
Terrific.
Thank you very much.
And let's keep in touch. Say hello to your partner.
Yes.
Maybe the next time I'll get to meet him.
Yes. Thank you again. Definitely keep in touch, and thank you everybody for your time.
Sounds great.
Take care. Bye-bye. You too. Bye-bye.